They say a gilded cage is still a cage. I could argue that it's worse. A brass prison holds shame. A golden one holds a lifetime of crushing, silent expectation. My life with Victor was a testament to his staggering wealth and even more staggering control. Every inch of our mansion, every piece of museum-grade art, every flawless surface reflected his power and, by extension, my complete lack of it. I was the centerpiece, the flawless diamond in his meticulously curated collection, meant to sparkle only when he commanded it. I lived in a state of perpetual performance. My days were a precise schedule of luncheons with his carefully selected associates, charity committee meetings where my silence was prized over my opinions, and evenings spent smiling brilliantly at galas. The emerald necklace he gave me was beautiful, yes, but whenever I wore it, I felt less like a woman and more like a captured bird with a heavy, glittering collar. It was dazzling, heavy, and utterly, profoundly suffocating. I stood before the full-length mirror tonight, the night I chose to end it. I turned my head slightly, catching the refraction of the chandelier light against the necklace, a perfect, expensive prisoner preparing for her nightly showing. The irony of being trapped in a life everyone else coveted was a bitter, daily poison I could no longer swallow. Victor had traded on my family name and my dowry, a tidy sum of liquid assets, to stabilize one of his riskier ventures. He saw our marriage not as a union of hearts, but as a hostile takeover of my finances, cleverly disguised by a veneer of high society romance. Tonight, the air tasted different. It was sharp, thrilling, and laced with the metallic tang of adrenaline. My heart wasn't pounding with anxiety, but with the sharp, rhythmic certainty of a pendulum swinging toward finality. Downstairs, the annual Victor Carlyle Foundation Gala was in full, roaring swing. It was the perfect, blinding distraction. Hundreds of witnesses, all focused on flashing cameras, bottomless champagne, and the pursuit of social elevation, making them deaf and blind to the small, vital detail, me, slipping away. The key to my freedom wasn't a ticket out, but a set of documents locked away in the study vault. Not the cash, which I wouldn't touch, but the papers, the prenuptial amendments, and the original asset transfer agreements. Victor believed they were secure, that only he possessed the means to access them. Without those physical papers, his claims on me, both financial and legal, were flimsy at best. I needed to reclaim my legal self before I could reclaim my physical self. I slipped off the emerald collar and placed it carefully on the velvet liner of the vanity. The black sequined gown, a garment made of 1,000 tiny, glittering scales, felt too loud, too attention-seeking for my current task. I changed swiftly into a simple charcoal gray suit jacket and trousers, Victor's, actually, stolen over the course of several months from his seldom-used guest wardrobe. They were slightly too large, but they were the only clothes I owned that felt like armor, that hid the curves that had been constantly scrutinized. I found the small, leather-bound key card hidden inside the false bottom of my antique jewelry box, a hiding place Victor would never stoop to investigate, viewing the box as beneath his notice. I had watched him use it 100 times over the past year, memorizing the sequence of movements, the precise angle of the insert, the tiny delay before the mechanism engaged. It was a secret he thought only he possessed, a weakness born of sheer, blinding arrogance. The private study was empty, cloaked in the shadows cast by the moon and the distant lights of the city. It smelled faintly of expensive cigar smoke, old leather, and his cold, calculating ego. I approached the hidden steel door, heart hammering so fiercely against my ribs it felt like it was trying to shatter them, making the silence of the room louder than the drunken revelry of the ballroom below. I inserted the card. A terrifying beat of silence stretched, and then, click. The moment the vault door swung inward, releasing the scent of old paper and dust, I knew I was free. The smell of freedom wasn't fresh air. It was the dry scent of documentation. I retrieved the folder, my future, tucked it into the inside pocket of the jacket, and left everything else untouched. I didn't want his money, his jewels, or his property. I wanted my life. I wanted nothing that could tie me back to him. My escape through the service wing was silent, efficient. I was a phantom in the servants' tunnel, slipping out the back door and into the merciful chaos of the city night. I moved swiftly, melting into the shadows of the alleyway like a ghost shedding its finery. The transition from the oppressive warmth of the mansion to the cool, indifferent air of freedom was a dizzying shock. The cold was cleansing. I walked for hours, every block a mile marker away from my old identity. I hailed a cab, instructed him to take me to the farthest rail station, and paid him in cash. The papers in my pocket felt like a beating heart. I rode the train until dawn painted the sky in bruised purples and exhausted grays, crossing state lines, traveling away from the neon glow of the metropolis toward the muted, earthy tones of the coast. My destination, chosen months ago on a quiet evening with a smuggled road atlas, was Cresthaven, small, forgotten coastal town, too far from the financial centers to hold any interest for Victor, too sleepy for anyone to notice a woman in an oversized suit jacket arriving with no luggage. My first few days in Cresthaven were defined by quiet survival. I rented a small, unassuming room above a bookstore, the rent paid for with a single bank account Victor didn't know existed, a small inheritance from my grandmother, kept sacred and separate. The room was simple, a narrow bed, a chipped dresser, a window overlooking the mist-covered ocean. It was paradise. My body was free, but my mind was still locked in the cage. Every unexpected sound made me flinch. Every shadow felt like an approaching private investigator. I had to consciously tell myself that the small, kind transactions of daily life, buying coffee, asking for directions, were safe. I spent my days observing, learning the rhythm of the town, trying to blend in until I became part of the wallpaper. I needed to become Dina, the nobody. I found work at the local, dust-scented library, a haven of order and silence, shelving books and organizing forgotten archives. It was here, surrounded by the wisdom of countless lives, that I started learning to trust the ground beneath my feet again. I thought I would be alone forever, defined by my flight, forever glancing over my shoulder. Cresthaven smelled of three things: salt, old wood, and the faint, comforting aroma of baked bread from the corner bakery. It was a town built on history and fishing, its economy slow and steady, immune to the frantic, fleeting trends of the city I had fled. My room above the aptly named Tides and Tales bookstore had a low ceiling and a view of the working harbor. Instead of diamond rings, I woke to the clang of rigging and the cry of gulls. The library became my sanctuary. Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, was a woman whose kindness was as sharp and clear as the glass reading spectacles perched on her nose. She asked no questions about my past, accepting my simple resume and quiet demeanor as perfectly suited for her historical collection. She taught me the difference between archiving and simply shelving, the respect you owe to a book's history. My greatest challenge in those early weeks was not physical security, but psychological de-escalation. My body was still operating on the high alert of trauma. I would stand in the produce aisle, unable to choose an apple because the simple act of choosing felt too weighty, too much like asserting an unauthorized opinion. At the Carlisle dinner table, choice was an illusion. Everything was predetermined, from the wine to my conversation topics. Now, faced with a bounty of simple decisions, I felt paralyzed. I spent my evenings on the old wooden porch swing attached to the back of the bookstore, wrapped in a coarse wool blanket, watching the mist roll in. I was trying to deconstruct my identity. Who was Dina when she wasn't Victor's wife? Who was she without the security of endless wealth? I learned to live small. I cooked simple meals, soups and stews, and found a genuine satisfaction in the warmth they provided. I started noticing things: the precise shade of violet that painted the sky just after sunset, the sound of the ocean when the tide was fully out, leaving only a hissing whisper on the sand. These small, sensory details were my anchors, pulling me back to the present, away from the terrifying echoes of the past. My emotional state was brittle, like thin glass. I avoided looking into mirrors too long because the reflection, even without the heavy makeup and forced smile, looked too much like the previous Dina. I needed time to grow into my own skin again. Then, one particularly damp Tuesday in late October, the door chime above the library desk rang, signaling a change in the weather or perhaps a change in my world. He walked in quietly, shaking the dampness from his dark green canvas jacket. He wasn't grand or imposing. He wore old, comfortable jeans and a faded navy sweater, and he smelled faintly of wood smoke, coffee, and something clean and earthy, like freshly cut cedar. This was Adrian. His hair was the color of dark molasses, slightly too long, falling across his forehead when he looked down. His hands, I noticed them immediately, were large, capable, and marked with faint, white scars, the honorable badges of a man who worked with tools. They were the antithesis of Victor's hands, which were soft, manicured, and only ever touched a contract or a champagne glass. Adrian approached my desk, but his gaze was not on me. His eyes, a deep, intelligent gray, were fixed on the spine of a book I had just shelved in the local history section. "Excuse me," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that seemed to resonate with the quiet of the library. "I'm looking for The Wreck of the Osprey. It's a slim volume, privately published, usually filed under 19th century salvage." I looked him up in the system. It should be here, mister." "Adrian Thorne," he supplied, leaning slightly on the counter. His posture was relaxed, unhurried. He didn't demand attention. He simply occupied his space. "I found the card. It appears to be missing. Perhaps in archives? I've been cataloging some older materials in the back." "The archives," he murmured, a hint of genuine excitement entering his voice. "That would make sense. It's the kind of book that falls through the cracks. It details the entire salvage operation, not just the loss. A fascinating look at the engineering of that era." For the first time in months, I felt an intellectual curiosity stir within me that had nothing to do with survival. "You're a maritime historian?" He laughed, a genuine, unpretentious sound. "I'm a woodworker and boat restorer. History is just my research department. I'm currently restoring a hull from that period, and I need to see if the original timber and fastener choices match the documentation." He left his name and number with Mrs. Henderson, promising to check back next week. He started visiting every Tuesday and Thursday, always the same time, always asking questions about the quiet, forgotten books. He never lingered too long, never made small talk about the weather or my personal life. Our conversations were small and honest, focusing on ideas, materials, and stories. The library was the perfect shield. Our interactions were strictly professional, protected by the tall stacks of silent books. I began to anticipate his visits. I would subtly check the shelf for the Osprey volume, dusting the adjacent books, making sure I was at the front desk when he arrived. I cherished the way he used my name, just Dina, without any title, without any social weight attached. One afternoon, he brought me a small, perfectly carved wooden bookmark, a stylized, sleek rendition of a whale's tale. "A thank you for always chasing down my obscure requests," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Adrian, you shouldn't have. It's beautiful." I turned the wood over in my fingers. It was so smooth, so warm. It felt real. "It's just scrap wood from a project," he insisted, but the pride in his eyes contradicted the modesty of his words. It seemed right that someone who handles so many stories should have a place marker for her own. His comment resonated deeply, striking at the heart of my solitude. He saw me, not as a librarian, but as a person with an untold narrative. Weeks turned into a quiet, routine rhythm. Our interactions remained confined to the library, but they expanded in depth. Adrian would sketch diagrams of whole sections on scrap paper, explaining the hydrostatic balance of 19th century schooners. I found myself explaining the archival system, the fragility of old acid paper, and the surprising life stories I uncovered in people's donated letters. He didn't see a trophy or an asset. He saw Dina, the person who understood the importance of forgotten details and loved the smell of aged paper. One evening, after closing, I was walking along the damp docks, heading back to my room. The fog was rolling in thick and fast, turning the streetlights into hazy halos. I stopped to watch a lone fishing boat pull into the harbor, its engine a low, comforting thrum. "Long shift," I spun around. Adrian was leaning against a stack of lobster traps, a cup of coffee in his hand, a thick wool beanie pulled low over his forehead. He looked less like an academic and more like a capable, seasoned fisherman.
Adrian.
What are you doing out here? Waiting for a shipment of white oak. And, apparently, waiting for you. This is always the best time to see the fog roll in. He gestured with his cup. Care for a better view? It's just across the street. His better view was a small, independent coffee shop that was closing up, but the owner, a friendly woman named Sarah, was handing him a fresh cup. Adrian, my favorite procrastinator. Got your dark roast. And one for your friend. Thanks, Sarah. He handed me the steaming cup. Best coffee on the coast, and she lets me use the porch swing for pre-dawn observation. We sat on the shop's covered porch swing, identical to the one outside my apartment, but more exposed to the street. It was late, and the street was nearly silent. The comfort of the shared silence was profound. In Victor's world, silence was a weapon, the precursor to a lecture or a demand. Here, with Adrian, it was a blanket, a sign that no performance was required. After a few minutes, he broke the quiet, not with a question, but an observation. The way you handle those brittle old books. It's like you're afraid to breathe too hard near them. You have a lot of respect for fragility. I took a sip of the scalding coffee, gathering my courage. His gentle perception was the trigger. Maybe I understand what it feels like to be handled too roughly. The admission hung in the damp air. I watched his face. He didn't jump in with facile questions or expressions of shock. He waited, his gray eyes steady and entirely focused. Victor, I began, the name tasting like ash on my tongue. I spoke slowly, carefully, telling him the simplified, legal version first. The disastrous marriage, the financial entanglement, the meticulous planning of the escape with the documents. Then I told him the harder truth, the isolation, the constant criticism, the feeling of my soul shrinking to fit the exact dimensions of his expectations. I told him how, even here, in the quiet, the fear still clung to me like sea mist, how every car that slowed down on the street made me instinctively crouch down. I finished, my voice raspy. The confession felt less like a heavy burden and more like a final splinter being pulled from my flesh. Adrian sat back on the swing, which creaked softly in protest. You didn't run from revenge, he finally said, his voice low and firm, echoing the words I hadn't even realized were my own mantra. You ran towards peace. You ran towards yourself. That takes more courage than any empire builder possesses, Dina. He didn't offer pity. He offered validation. He offered the simple, profound understanding that my flight was an act of strength, not a failure. He didn't offer to fight my battles or fix my past. He offered something infinitely better, partnership. He offered me a space where I could simply be, cherished for my mind and my heart, not for the value of the name attached to mine. He offered the realization that my struggle had earned me this quiet moment of peace. In that instant, I knew I could trust him with my life. Not because he was strong, but because he was profoundly, genuinely gentle. The transition from acquaintance to friendship, and then to something deeper, with Adrian was slow, deliberate, and built on shared silences and honest labor. It was the antithesis of the whirlwind, performative courtship Victor had orchestrated. Adrian's workshop was a large, drafty warehouse near the harbor, smelling wonderfully of sawdust, varnish, and metal. He restored antique sailing vessels, meticulously piecing together rotted frames and bringing forgotten hulls back to seaworthy life. It was a painstaking, patient process, and watching him work was like watching a master healer. I started spending my off hours there. I wasn't just observing, I was helping. I learned to sand wood until it felt like silk, to mix paint precisely, to use a block plane. It was profoundly satisfying work. With every stroke of the sandpaper, I felt like I was sanding away the rough edges of my old life, smoothing over the damage. Adrian's cherishing of me was woven into these moments. He taught me patiently, never once belittling my clumsiness or my lack of experience. He'd stand behind me, his hands gently guiding mine on the plane, the warmth of him a solid, non-threatening presence. "Don't fight the grain, Dina," he murmured one afternoon, as I struggled with a stubborn piece of white oak. "Respect its direction. If you try to force it, you'll just tear the wood and waste your effort. Work with what it gives you." It wasn't just carpentry advice, it was life advice. Victor had spent a decade trying to force me against my own grain, trying to shape me into his ideal. Adrian was teaching me to respect my natural direction. Our first kiss wasn't a dramatic moment under the stars, but a quiet, surprising one in the late afternoon sun, smelling of salt and turpentine. I had finished sanding a massive wooden rudder for a client. My arms ached, my face was smeared with dust, and I felt utterly, beautifully exhausted. Adrian looked at me, not with lust or expectation, but with a gaze full of immense pride and respect. "You finished it," he said, his voice soft with admiration. "We finished it," I corrected, wiping my cheek with a dusty hand. He stepped closer, his large, capable hand gently brushing the sawdust from my cheekbone. His touch was hesitant, seeking permission, not demanding proximity. He looked into my eyes, and I saw a depth of understanding that went beyond attraction. He saw the resilience in my smudged face. He kissed me slowly, a soft, deliberate pressure that felt like coming home. There was no theatricality, no performance, just a deep, settling comfort that resonated to my core. It wasn't about fireworks. It was about the quiet, solid warmth of a perfectly built hearth. Our relationship became a different kind of fortress. It wasn't a cage to keep me in, but a safe space to keep the outside world, Victor's world, out. We'd cook together in his tiny, cluttered kitchen, talking about everything and nothing. He'd ask about my favorite books, my childhood dreams, and what I hoped to accomplish in a world, treating my opinions as though they were pieces of gold. He didn't try to know my trauma. He focused on knowing my heart. Adrian's cherishing was in the details. He never asked me to dress up. He loved me in my dusty jeans and comfortable sweaters. He always made sure the door was locked twice when I was alone, recognizing my deep-seated anxiety without judging it. He remembered the tiny details of my stories. Once, I offhandedly mentioned I missed my grandmother's lemon cake. The next day, he presented me with a slightly lopsided, perfectly delicious lemon cake he'd spent the morning baking. This wasn't just love, it was care. It was the unwavering knowledge that I was precious, not because of what I represented, but because of who I was. For nearly a year, Cresthaven remained a sanctuary, and Adrian remained my grounding force. I had even started writing again, short stories about forgotten women who took charge of their own destinies. The past felt distant, a fever dream from which I had finally woken. Then the first shadow fell. It was a chilly, clear afternoon. I was walking home from the library, a stack of returned books balanced on my hip. A new car was parked across the street from the Tides and Tales bookstore, a sleek, black sedan, entirely out of place among the battered pickup trucks and rusty minivans of the locals. It had tinted windows, and even though no one was visibly sitting in the driver's seat, I felt a familiar, visceral chill run down my spine. It was a feeling I knew instantly. It was the scent of Victor's reach. I rushed inside, my heart hammering against the stolen papers still secured in a safe deposit box downtown. I flew up the stairs to my room and peered out the window. The car hadn't moved. Later that evening, Adrian found me in his workshop, furiously sanding a piece of wood until my hands were blistered and raw. "Dina, stop." He gently took the sandpaper from my grasp, his eyes full of concern. "What's wrong?" "The black car," I whispered, tears of fear and frustration stinging my eyes. "It's there. It's Victor. He must have traced the bank account, the rail ticket, something. He won't let me go quietly." The panic was overwhelming. I was regressing, shrinking back into the corner of the gilded cage. Adrian didn't dismiss my fear as paranoia. He knew the gravity of Victor's ego. He held my face gently, forcing me to look at him. "We planned for this, remember? We know the documents are safe. The goal now is to remove the threat, not to hide from it." He calmly formulated a plan. He arranged for me to stay with Sarah, the coffee shop owner, who lived on a secluded farm 10 miles inland. We packed a small bag. Before leaving, he went back to the bookstore, taking 2 steps at a time. He wasn't confronting anyone. He was making an observation. When he returned, his face was grim. "It's a PI, a cheap one." They asked Mrs. Henderson about a woman matching the description of a runaway wife. She played dumb, but they're poking around. He drove me out to Sarah's farm, a cozy, ramshackle place filled with the smells of hay and baked goods. "Stay here for 2 days, Adrian instructed, his voice steady. "Don't contact me. I need to make a move that ensures your legal freedom is finalized before he can escalate this physically." "What are you going to do?" I grabbed his hand, the old fear twisting in my gut. "I'm going to use the leverage you gave me," he said, kissing my forehead. "You didn't run from a fight, Dina, but sometimes the fight has to be finished. Trust me." Adrian left, and for the first time since I met him, I felt utterly alone. But the difference was, this time, I wasn't just running. I was waiting for a man to execute a plan that involved my intelligence and my documents. I wasn't a victim. I was a collaborator. Adrian didn't disappear into the shadows. He walked straight into the light. He didn't return to the workshop. Instead, he drove 2 hours north to the city where Victor's family law firm was headquartered. He wasn't relying on brute force or dramatic confrontation. He was relying on the cold, hard logic of bureaucracy, the very thing that had entrapped me. What he did next was a testament to his quiet brilliance and his dedication to my peace. Adrian, impersonating a low-level, high-stakes messenger, delivered a carefully drafted, anonymous letter to the senior partner of Victor's law firm. The letter was simple, concise, and devastating. It stated that the firm's client, Victor Carlyle, was attempting to track and intimidate his wife, Dina, who had fled with documents proving his systemic breach of a high-value prenuptial agreement. Crucially, the letter included photocopies of the core documents, the clauses detailing my liquid assets and the penalty Victor would face if he ever attempted to physically or legally restrict my movement, a clause my shrewd grandmother had insisted upon years ago. The penalty was steep, a multi-million-dollar fine payable to my family trust, and more importantly, a guaranteed, humiliating public disclosure of his business failures. The letter finished with a clear ultimatum: cease and desist all pursuit immediately. File for no-fault divorce based on incompatibility. Accept the original financial settlement. Any further attempts to contact, track, or intimidate Dina will result in the immediate, public filing of these documents and the ensuing financial ruin and irreparable damage to the firm's reputation. Adrian knew that Victor's lawyers feared public scandal more than anything. Victor could never let those details surface. His entire empire was built on a veneer of flawless stability. Adrian returned 2 days later. He found me on the porch swing at Sarah's farm, staring at the vast, open fields. "It's done," he said simply, sitting beside me. He didn't look triumphant, just weary and relieved. "What did you do?" "I changed the game for his lawyers. I reminded them that you hold the nuclear launch codes, Dina. They have advised Victor to stand down, immediately and permanently. They initiated the no-fault divorce filing this morning, citing irreconcilable differences. They want this to vanish into the paperwork abyss." I slumped against him, a sudden, powerful wave of exhaustion washing over me. It wasn't revenge, it was finality. I hadn't destroyed him, but I had permanently removed myself from his orbit, and he had paid the cost. "You're free," Adrian whispered, wrapping his arms around me. "Truly free. The law firm is now handling his ego, and they are far better equipped for the task than we are." Over the next few weeks, the divorce proceeded with chilling speed and silence. Victor, bound by his lawyers and the fear of public exposure, signed everything. The black car vanished from Cresthaven. The chapter was closed. I didn't have to fight him. I just had to be defended by a man who respected my intelligence and used my own legal groundwork to win my peace. With the legal finality, a deep, pervasive quiet settled over me. I quit the library, not because I disliked it, but because I no longer needed a hiding place. I started spending all my time with Adrian in the glorious, dusty chaos of his workshop. We weren't just partners in life. We were partners in craft. I helped him source specialty materials, using the organizational skills honed during my life as Victor's perfect social hostess. He taught me the patience required to resurrect something damaged. We were two people, both quietly restoring and rebuilding things, him, the boats, me, my life. My healing wasn't linear. There were still days when a loud noise made me jump, or when I hesitated before speaking, instinctively censoring myself. But Adrian was always there, a steady, unblinking presence. One rainy Saturday, we were finishing the hull of a small skiff. We were both covered in fine sawdust, our hands stained with oil. I was sitting on the floor, applying the final, glossy coat of varnish. "Dina," Adrian said, cleaning his hands on a rag. He walked over and knelt beside me. He reached into the inner pocket of his denim work shirt and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. My breath hitched. My mind immediately flashed to Victor, the massive, blinding diamond he had insisted upon, the public display, the obligation. I tensed, bracing for the theatrical moment. Adrian, sensing my internal retreat, didn't open the pouch. He simply took my dusty, varnished hand and held it. "This is not an obligation, Dina. This is not a performance. This isn't about property or status. I don't want to cage you. I want to anchor you." He then opened the pouch. Inside, there was no diamond, no traditional gold. It was a simple, elegant ring, hand-carved from a piece of ancient, deep red mahogany salvaged from the Osprey wreck, the very book that brought us together. The wood was rich, dark, and utterly unique, inlaid with a single, tiny sliver of polished mother-of-pearl that caught the light like a star. "This wood has seen generations of storms and silence," he murmured, his thumb stroking my wrist. "It's strong, it's beautiful, and it was nearly destroyed before it found its true purpose. Just like you." He looked into my eyes, the gray depth of them full of a certainty that banished all my past fears. "I am not asking you to be my wife, the socialite. I am asking you to be my partner, Dina. To build a life here, on this shore, where your choices are your own, and your light is never hidden." Tears streamed down my face, washing paths through the sawdust. This was the true proposal, the one that asked for my heart, not my name. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Yes, Adrian. I want to be anchored here, with you." He gently slid the warm, wooden band onto my finger. It fit perfectly. It felt like a promise, a small, humble piece of history that had survived the wreck, now dedicated to a quiet, beautiful future. We didn't have a grand society wedding. We were married on the docks at sunrise 3 months later, with Sarah, Mrs. Henderson, and a few of Adrian's salty old boat-building friends as witnesses. I wore a simple cream linen dress, and Adrian wore his favorite jacket. The only extravagance was the food, the most wonderful, lopsided lemon cake, baked by Adrian himself. Our happiness wasn't a sudden, blinding flash. It was the slow, steady warmth of a house well-built, designed for shelter from the storm. Adrian continued to cherish me, every day, in ways both large and small. The patient silence when I needed space, the gentle insistence when I needed a hug, and the unwavering belief in the strength I was still discovering within myself. My past was the shattered, gilded cage. My present was the smooth, warm mahogany ring on my hand, and the capable, loving man who knelt beside me, always working with the grain. I had run from everything, and in doing so, I had finally found what truly mattered, a life of light, love, and quiet, profound peace.